Hear from Johnny Ball about the problem of older people and their digital skills. Ask what's next for the Palestine Action hunger strikers. Wonder whether the actors will strike over AI, and celebrate something you might not expect. The British economy is actually doing, whisper it, quite well. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Kemi Badenoch says the government shouldn't blame young boys for misogyny. The Tory leader has criticised its strategy on tackling violence against women and girls. She says they should be putting more police officers on the streets and deporting foreign criminals. But the Prime Minister insists the strategy should include prevention.
Yes, I want to strengthen what we do when we actually are able to prosecute cases, but I absolutely want to get in at the very early stage, just that discussion about a healthy relationship, boys and girls.
The Chancellor says a cut to interest rates is welcome news for families and businesses. The Bank of England reduced the base rate to 3.75% earlier. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has hit out at another possible delay to local elections. 63 councils could opt to postpone them until 2027. The government claims merging councils are struggling to reorganise. And a warning of heavy rain continues into this evening for South Wales and a lot of southern England. The Met Office says there could be travel disruption as a result. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 63 points at 98.37. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.14. LBC weather, patchy rain will continue to push northwards, leaving a mostly dry night. Further showers across Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England, a low of 1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Ukraine, fighting heroically for her survival, is running out of money. Europe has plenty of spare money in the form of Russian assets frozen at the beginning of the war. Tonight in Brussels, at a summit of European leaders, the only question that matters is whether this money, some £200 billion worth, will be unfrozen to help Ukraine, despite the hostility of both Russia and many in Trump's Washington. Most of the Russian money is held in Belgium, and this is getting nasty. Its Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, says he has been warned by Moscow that if he unfreezes its assets, I personally will feel the effects for eternity. The boss of the financial services group, which has most of the money, Valérie Urbain, has also been personally threatened by the Russians. She now has to use a bodyguard at all times. With Putin saying he'd regard passing the assets to Ukraine to allow it to keep fighting as straightforward theft, the stakes are now very high. Here's how the anti-corruption campaigner Bill Browder described the confrontation to me here yesterday.
If Ukraine can get this money, they can survive for as long as they need to defeat Russia. If they don't, they will be defeated, and then we'll be fighting Russia.
It's a moral question. It's about courage. But I'm not saying it's easy or consensual. Here's the other side of the argument from Hungary's Viktor Orban, an ally of Putin, speaking outside the Brussels meeting earlier today.
Guarantees for what? The whole idea is a stupid one. To take away the money of somebody. There are two countries which are in war, yeah? It's not European Union, Russia and Ukraine. And somebody, European Union, would like to take away the money of one of the warriors parties and then to give it to another one. It's a marching into the war. So the Belgian Prime Minister is right. We should not do that.
Well, whatever happens, today's decision will be hugely important for Ukraine and the future of the war. I think it's also about European strength and self-respect. And I'm joined now by the EU Ambassador to London, Pedro Serrano. Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for coming in. The Belgian Prime Minister, who's at the centre of all of this thing, has said that if a deal is not done for Ukraine, it will be a huge geopolitical embarrassment for the EU. Do you agree?
I think the European Union has been steadfast supporting Ukraine from the outset of the war. And today we're seeing how we can support it further at a very critical moment in the conflict and also in arrangements towards a peace deal. And I have no doubt that the leaders right now gathered in Brussels are looking very seriously at how they can continue supporting financially the effort. And important proposals are on the table, and they will be, therefore, I'm certain that they will come with an important reply and outcome.
Because this is a really important moment for the EU on the world stage as well. We've got, on the one hand, President Trump and people around him deriding Europe as a kind of failed, hollowed out part of the world with weak leaders. And you've got President Putin describing EU leaders as little pigs and again being derisive. This is the moment, surely, when Europe has to stand up and say, this is who we really are.
Europe has been standing up since definitely 2022, since the very beginning of the war. We've come up with more than 180 billion euros in support of Ukraine, more than 66 billion, I think, in support of the military effort in Ukraine. And we are determined to continue supporting Ukraine and in order to ensure security in the European continent and working very closely with the United Kingdom in those efforts.
This is a very, very complicated area, and I know that there are different proposals on the table at the moment, but are you fairly confident in your waters that at the end of this, Ukraine will get some financial help it needs?
Ukraine has received constantly financial help from the European Union. I have no doubt that this is going to continue and be the outcome of today's meeting.
Let me ask you about domestic politics here, because if you look at the opinion polls and you look at what ministers are saying, there is a tilt going on towards the EU from London for the first time for a while. We've had one cabinet minister reflecting on possibly being a member of the customs union again. We've had others saying that's not possible. But the British public seems to be going more pro-European than for a while. We've had the Erasmus programme announced yesterday. Do you see a steady improvement in relations between London and Brussels?
Well, the Labour government developed already in its manifesto the idea of a reset of relations with Europe. We had a major summit, first post-Brexit summit between the European Union and the United Kingdom in May, with the presidents of the European Council, president of the Commission coming to London, meeting with the Prime Minister Starmer, agreeing on a real programme of work and a new narrative for the relationship. And now we're seeing the first fruits of this. And one of the first fruits, as you mentioned, is this agreement on Erasmus, but also a lot of progress for the UK to join the electricity market of the European Union. We have launched negotiations on a phytosanitary agreement. We've launched negotiations on emission trading system linkages. So there's very important work. There's very important work underway, and I have no doubt that it's going to be fruitful.
You don't think that's going to go as far as rejoining the customs union or anything like that?
Well, the Labour government made it very clear that this was one of the red lines, and there has been no talk about this for the time being. The European Union is very keen on a strong relationship with the United Kingdom. This is vital for European security, and as you were mentioning earlier before, when we started speaking, the importance of the moment for Europe's security calls for a very strong EU-UK relationship in all dimensions of that relationship.
Can I ask you a blunter question, perhaps, which is, do you really want us? Because if you look at the row over defence spending, which did not go well, it's almost as if it appears sometimes in London that the EU would like us back, but on our knees, penitent, bowed, beaten, pleading, but not otherwise.
I don't have at all that feeling. No one wants. We want a strong United Kingdom. Strong United Kingdom that helps support a strong Europe. And I think that's what we're working towards. And by the way, on defence and defence spending, there is a very important offer on the table, free of charge, for the United Kingdom to join joint procurement with the rest of the European member states, and for companies in the UK to join efforts in developing assets up to 35% of content, but which is not a negligible offer. No. And the same for and companies, UK companies based in the European Union can also benefit from contracts.
Just circling around to where we started, and I've been reflecting on what Viktor Orban was saying. How difficult is it for the EU to have somebody so pro-Moscow, so pro-Russian inside the tent at these negotiations?
Well, we have been able to have 19 packages of sanctions so far. We have been supporting Ukraine at an incredible level and unprecedented levels in terms of financial, macro-financial support. We have been supporting the war effort, and all this has been done in full agreement amongst the 27 member states.
And what about his, I suppose, most pungent attack on the EU, which is, if you unfreeze this money and you give it to Ukraine, we will all be marching towards war?
We have been supporting Ukraine. I think the best way to avoid war in Europe is supporting Ukraine and being strong in that support to Ukraine. And because Ukraine actually is holding and keeping security for the rest of Europe. And I think that's what we've been doing since the 24 February 2022, and we will continue doing this.
Well, it's a very, very important day, a very, very important evening. Ambassador,
Indeed.
Thank you so much for coming in and talking to LBC tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
And listening to that is Stephanie Baker, senior writer on the investigations team at Bloomberg and author of Punishing Putin Inside the Global Economic War to Bring Down Russia. Stephanie, thank you very much indeed for joining me tonight. You heard, I'm sure, what has been said about the Belgian Prime Minister being under personal threat, as well as the head of the relevant bank in Belgium. How seriously do you think they should take these threats?
Well, this is part of the Russian playbook. They are hitting back hard, trying to prevent this from going ahead. They have sued Euroclear, the institution in Belgium that holds the majority of the Russian assets, in Moscow. And I think there's a belief in the EU that that's not the correct jurisdiction to fight this. So they're doing absolutely everything they can to try to prevent this loan from going ahead, including threatening retaliation, saying that they could seize the assets of Western investors in Russia if the EU goes ahead with this plan.
Now, you've studied the whole business of sanctions in some detail. How big a moment is it in that story, this moment of possibly taking almost all of the Russian assets and handing them to Ukraine?
This EU meeting is definitely crunch time, and the whole issue of freezing Russia's central bank assets was a big part of my book, Punishing Putin, that I explored at length and talked to a lot of people about the legality of going ahead, the next step from freezing to confiscating.
And what did you conclude, Stephanie? What was your verdict?
There have been a lot of eminent legal scholars and foreign policy analysts that have looked at this. And there are many people who believe there is a sound legal basis for what they call state-on-state countermeasures. So this is, Russia has violated international law, and so the state has a legal basis to take countermeasures, in this case, seizing this money, and that there is a precedent for it, namely Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, where they did sequester Iraqi oil revenues to pay for victims of that invasion. And that, of course, was approved by the UN Security Council. That is not possible now because of Russia and China vetoing any plan that would resemble that. So I think that's the biggest stumbling block, that there's not an international mechanism to validate such a move.
I see. And clearly, Vladimir Putin is livid about this. And apart from threatening action against Western assets in Russia, he's also saying that if he wins, he will just demand the money back. So he could do that, presumably.
He could, but there has been precedent for this being done before. In the case of Iran and Afghanistan, the amounts of money were much, much smaller. This is a much bigger pot of money, $300 billion that Putin left in Western financial institutions when the full-scale invasion happened, betting that they would not take this step because it was so unprecedented. He can demand it back. He can try to sue, but I think it would be an uphill struggle on his part, which is why he is threatening retaliation, the prospect of seizing Western investors and company assets in Russia. Having said that, the amount of money, it's somewhat uncertain how much is actually in Russia, is probably smaller than what the West has, the 300 billion that the West has frozen in EU, UK, US, and elsewhere.
This is the moment that we can look back and look at the EU and discover whether there is real strength, there is real steel inside the EU about this. But it's also a very, very dangerous moment, clearly. What's your feeling about the individual pressure on EU leaders and bankers from the Russians? I mean, this is unprecedented.
It is, and what you've seen recently is it's not just Hungary raising questions about it; it's Italy and Bulgaria also raising questions, likely due to pressure from the U.S. Because remember, as part of the 28-point peace plan that was revealed at the beginning of the most recent peace negotiations, that pot of money was on the table that the U.S. wanted to use to create a fund to help reconstruct Ukraine. So Trump wants that pot of money and does not want this to go ahead.
Indeed. And final question, in your waters, it's a very, very long night, I suspect, ahead. What do you think the outcome will be?
I think they have to make this decision because the alternatives are so unpalatable. It's either turning to EU pooled debt, and there's disagreement, and Hungary and others would object to that, or it is allowing Ukraine to not get the funds that it needs and potentially allowing Russia to gain further territory, which will have a direct security implication for the rest of Europe, potentially more refugees. So this is a real turning point, and it's crunch time for the EU.
It certainly is. Big, big night. Stephanie Baker, thank you so much for talking to LBC. The long-awaited Violence Against Women and Girls strategy has now been released. But can the government succeed in ripping out harmful misogynistic attitudes, root and stem? Time now, 6:16.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
They come here because they know it's a soft touch.
Straight to the point.
How does this even add up?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
This is a Whitehall farce, without any doubt.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
For people living
Night with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:18. The government's new action plan to stop violence against women and girls will target schoolboys, teaching them about abuse, harassment, stalking, and the fundamental truth that pornography isn't real life. Toxic masculinity is the fashionable phrase. But the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, said today it wasn't 11-year-old boys who were committing violence against women and girls. She said, we need to get people who have come from cultures that don't respect women out of this country. I'm joined now by the Justice Minister, Alex Davies-Jones, and she told me a little bit more about the idea that misogynistic attitudes start very young.
That's entirely right, Andrew, and they are starting younger and younger. The really concerning behaviours and patterns that we are seeing in our young children is something that we need to tackle. These are issues that are becoming ingrained from a very young age because of osmosis of what these children are seeing online, what they're being exposed to, and we need to tackle this. We need to tackle this in the home, online, in schools, in the workplaces, in the streets, wherever this is. We need to stamp out this harmful misogynistic behaviour.
Now, the government is already trying to stop young people using porn, but how much of the strategy is persuading boys in particular that what they see in porn is nothing to do with real life?
This is a huge, huge issue, and we are seeing a worrying trend of violent extreme pornography having real-world consequences. We have seen a dramatic rise in strangulation cases because of what young people are seeing in pornography, and they are thinking that this is normal and what is acceptable. So we need to be teaching young people, and well, everyone, not just young people, about what is a healthy consensual relationship. The government has announced that we will be banning the depiction of strangulation, making it a new criminal offence in pornography. We have, as you've said, introduced new measures to tackle online pornography via the Online Safety Act, and as a result of those measures, those age verification checks, Pornhub has actually seen an over 70% decrease in traffic to its site. So this is working. However, we need to do more. And the government have announced today that we're also going to be banning these horrific nudifying apps that only exist to exploit, degrade, and demean people by being able to show them as nude in an artificially intelligent way.
The implication for what you're saying about Pornhub is that 7 in 10 people watching online porn are children.
Yes, that's correct.
Absolutely.
Sadly, that is correct.
And at what kind of age are you finding children starting to use these apps?
Oh, from very young. We're talking age 10, 11. You know, young people are growing up online now. Their lives are online. More children than ever have access to smartphones and devices where they can access this harmful content really, really easy with a click of a button. My son is 6 and he is more proficient on an iPad than I am. This is something that we need to be aware of as parents, as society, and we need to protect our children and our young people because it is having damaging real-world harm.
Now, in terms of who actually does stuff as a result of this new initiative, it's really down to teachers above all else. Are teachers going to have to be trained in how to deal with these issues?
So this is a whole societal approach that we need to take to tackle violence against women and girls. This isn't one person's responsibility, but we have been very clear that prevention is at the heart of this. And that means having to educate our young people about, as I've said, healthy consensual relationships and what is damaging and deeply traumatic behaviours that are escalating and becoming real world crimes. So we're investing £20 million into our education system, which is there to support teachers to deal with some of these behaviours, to give them that guidance that they need. But we're also going further, Andrew. We're bringing in the experts. We're bringing in specialist provision from outside to help our young people and to help our schools and our educators to really tackle some of this harmful behaviour at its root, so that we can stamp it out.
Well, Minister, you'll have seen that Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, has said that it's not 11-year-old boys attacking girls and women. It's migrants who've come here from profoundly misogynistic and very, very different cultures. But yet your strategy doesn't cover that because you're all too politically correct. Does she have a point?
Our strategy is the most comprehensive violence against women and girls strategy there has ever been. We have left no stone unturned in looking at every single way to tackle violence against women and girls, and that means everyone. We have not singled any type of perpetrator out because anyone can commit these crimes, Andrew. That's why they're so prevalent. You know, 1 in 8 women in our country has experienced domestic abuse, sexual violence, stalking, or harassment. That is horrific, and that they are real women going through real traumatic times, yes. And they all need our help.
So this does cover, for instance, people who have come from, patriarchal, traditional, often Muslim societies with very, very old-fashioned views of women's place in the world. It'll cover that as well.
It will indeed. It will cover everything. As I've said, we've left no stone unturned in order to tackle violence against women and girls. And wherever these crimes, these heinous crimes are persisting, we will go after them and we will stamp them out.
You mentioned the online safety bill a little while ago. It's early days yet, but have you seen evidence that has actually changed behaviour and got people off some of these terrible sites?
We have. So the Online Safety Act, as you've said, it's quite a new piece of legislation, but it's slowly coming into force with Ofcom as the regulator. These codes of practice that the tech companies have to abide by, legally binding statutory codes of conduct, are beginning to show green shoots. We know there's still a hell of a lot more we need to do as a government and and working with tech companies to tackle this. But as I already said, 70% reduction in traffic to porn hubs since we introduced age verification. That is hugely significant, and it is having an impact.
A very, very important day. Alex Davies-Jones, thank you so much for talking to LBC. Now, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. Not El Alamein this time, but the British economy. The cut in interest rates by the Bank of England, down from 4% to 3.75%, takes us to the lowest level since February 2023. But is there perhaps a wider story here? In a recent article, Chris Giles, the economics commentator for the Financial Times, argued that the British economy is in fact doing much better than most of the media would have you believe. Why?
Let's start with what we know about the economy. It's not in a great place. It hasn't been in a brilliant place for about 15 or so years. But some of the stories we're being told about it just don't reflect what's actually happened. And what we're told now is that we're almost on the verge of a financial crisis. We'll have to go to the IMF. It's like 1976 again.
Yeah.
Unemployment is rife, and all these things just really aren't true. So when you look at the economy, there's two things that I think come out. One is that it's okay. It's not great, but the economy is going to grow 1.5% in 2025. That's pretty much a done deal now. And something similar to that in 2026, most likely. And that, again, is not brilliant, but it's not a disaster either.
And to what extent do you think it's been official forecasts, sort of casting a gloom, a pall over everybody? You look at the Bank of England forecasts in particular, going back to 2022, when they were sure we were heading for a really bad recession.
Well, that's absolutely right. So one thing that's happened is that it's turned out to be a lot better than we think. So if you go back to late 2022, so after the Liz Truss episode, so in November, so once we had a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, Jeremy Hunt was Chancellor, the public finances looked okay again then. But at the time, particularly natural gas prices were still very high and expected to remain extremely high for a very long time, which just makes the UK poorer. Now, that didn't happen. So financial markets were entirely wrong about that, not official forecasters. It was because they just put in what was in financial markets. And that meant that the UK's ended up about 7.5% richer than the Bank of England thought we would be now 3 years on. That's an enormous number for a family of four, so 2 adults and 2 kids. It's about £13,000 a year better off than the Bank of England thought we would be. Now, I'm not saying you should be grateful for that, but I am saying that just imagine had that forecast turned true, then we could have really said the economy was in a very bad place, and it's just nothing like that.
And of course, politics comes into this a bit, Chris. There's lots of people in the Conservative Party, for instance, who would say that Labour has absolutely destroyed the economy since the election. And again, I'd like your view on that. And there are lots of people, particularly on the other side, and the Labour Party saying we have been absolutely ravaged by Brexit and there's no recovery.
Yes, and both of those sides of the political narrative are completely over the top. So Brexit has almost certainly been bad for the UK economy, but ravaged, which is what people say, it is all to do with Brexit, is clearly not true. The UK economy has taken a step down after the great financial crisis. So we're now sort of 17, 18 years on from when we could say we had a really good economy. Brexit hurt it a little bit more, but let's not exaggerate how much more. And on the other side, the economy has been doing just about as well in 24 to 25 as it was in 23 to 24. So if the Conservatives are saying it's a terrible performance, well, then they also presided over a terrible performance.
Somebody looking at economics from the outside like me, it seems that there is always a cloud to every silver lining, if I can put it that way. And we've got inflation falling and we've got the bank cutting interest rates. And now people are going to say, well, that's because the entire economy is weakening, demand is very slack, and therefore we're heading towards a recession.
Yeah, I don't see why we should think we're heading towards a recession. There's nothing obviously in the data or in financial markets that suggests that. I think what we are seeing right now, and we've seen the last 2 or 3 months, we've seen really quite encouraging inflation figures, and that's going to allow the Bank of England to cut rates faster than it otherwise would have. They said today they're not going to go crazy. They're not going to cut really fast because they're still worried. They don't want inflation to come back, but it just gives them a little bit, a few more options. And if we can get into a situation in the middle of next year where it's quite clear that inflation is now coming back to target, then you can see you can have a much better narrative about the economy. Again, I'm not suggesting we're going to go into boom times, but it's just not the disaster that I think is often painted in many parts of the media.
Without asking for boom times imminently, if we look into the rearview mirror all the way back to 2008, when the crash happened, and for a lot of people, that was when the good times ended, is there any prospect of us getting back to those days?
Well, there's, what's changed since 2008 is that the productivity performance of the UK economy has deteriorated. So it used to grow at about 2% a year. Now it grows at roughly, we think, 0.5% to 1%. So we're losing about 1% a year, which is quite a significant amount of money once you tot it up over 17 years since 2008. Now, we still don't exactly understand why productivity growth is so much slower. So it could go back to where it was pre-crisis. And one of the reasons you think it might do could be AI. So in America, people are very excited about AI as being the thing that can turn the US economy back into the 1990s. And the truth is that if it works for America, we don't have the companies that produce AI in this country. But what ultimately really matters is the use of AI. And if that happens, that it improves the productivity performance, then yes, you could go back to a 2 to 3% growth per year economy. Of course, it won't feel quite the same as the 90s or the early 2000s because we've now got a much older and an aging population. So more money spent on public services really doesn't translate into better services. It just means you treat more older people.
Still, a little bit of festive glitter there, Chris. Final question, a sort of daft question from outside your profession. What do you think are the great strengths of the British economy today?
I think the great strengths, look, we often talk down the British economy. We are a relatively large, advanced economy, and on a par with France, with Germany. There's differences, but we are still a big advanced economy. We have the English language. We have a fantastic capital city, which is highly productive. And around the country, our best companies and our best sectors are as good as the best companies and best sectors anywhere in the world. So what we need to do is we need to pull up the rest of the economy to those sorts of levels. And if we can do that, we will find ourselves equally just as well off as those sorts of peer countries that we like to compare ourselves with.
I feel definitely more cheerful than I was 5 minutes ago, and I hope everybody listening feels the same way. Chris Giles, thank you very much indeed for that. Actors say they'd be prepared to take industrial action after a landslide vote against the digital scanning of their likeness in the latest pushback against AI. I'm going to be finding out how far artificial intelligence could steal the spotlight from our thespians. By the time now, 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The Victims Minister has told LBC the government has left no stone unturned in its strategy to tackle violence against women and girls. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Alex Davies-Jones says misogynistic attitudes are starting younger and younger. Veteran diplomat Christian Turner has been appointed as the UK's new ambassador to the US. The UK's current representative to the UN will replace Peter Mandelson, who was fired over his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And the Chancellor says there is more to do to help families with the cost of living after the Bank of England cut interest rates. Its Monetary Policy Committee voted to cut the base rate to 3.75%. LBC weather, patchy rain will continue to push northwards, leaving a mostly dry night. Further showers across Scotland, Northern Ireland and North West England, a low of 1.
This is LBC.
This Christmas.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:34. This was a landslide vote for industrial action. Film and TV actors have voted by 99.6% to refuse to be digitally scanned on set for the benefit of AI. It wasn't a legally binding ballot, but it gives muscle to the Actors Union Equity in talks with production companies. Equity's General Secretary, Paul Fleming, is with me now. Paul, great to have you on the show. First of all, can we explain to people listening exactly what the problem is? This is cameras scanning actors, then presumably to recreate them as AI.
Correct, yeah. And we're all very familiar with the idea that you might create an AI version of an individual actor. But the big worry for lots of our members is when your data, your performance, your likeness goes into the AI sausage machine and then comes out as something indistinguishable, some random fantasy character maybe, or a completely invented medieval knight in the background of a performance. Our members are relatively low earners. They earn about £15,000 a year from the industry. And what they are anxious about is that where AI is used, where their likeness is used, they get some share in the profit and the savings that result from the new technology. So that's the big worry.
So we're not really talking about the super best-known stars in the world who will carry on earning huge amounts of money. We're talking, if I can put it this way, about the spear carriers or the people at the edge of the set and so forth who are dressed up in Victorian costume and might find themselves completely replaced.
They're definitely at the sharp end of it now, but it's true that a number of high-profile performers, Hugh Bonneville and others, have not only voted in the ballot but are very, very anxious about what this will mean for them in the long run. We're an industry where a star today is somewhere else tomorrow, and they recognise that they came from somewhere else in the industry as well. So, whether you be a top of the call sheet, a stunt performer, a dancer, or a supporting artist, an extra, everybody is worried about what these implications have for them, but also for the audience and for the future of human creativity on screen.
Really silly question, perhaps, Paul, but if everybody goes on strike, won't AI just replace them?
This is the age-old comment of every boss. No, AI isn't that good, and it's certainly not going to be replacing principal characters anytime soon. But this is just we're attempting to move the conversation to a reasonable point to make sure that can never happen in the future, to mean that artists remain integral to the way in which productions are made.
Finally, Paul, a more general point, perhaps, because people say that AI is going to rewrite and change absolutely everything. But so far, it's pretty derivative. It's quite good at doing the same thing, more or less, as has been done before. But would you agree that what it doesn't have is ingenuity and genuine surprise built into it?
Correct, and it never can do. And what we mustn't do is fall into the trap of big tech. AI is a marketing term. It's not. It's a series of technologies, not one technology, and it does lots of different things in different parts of the world. And no, there's no way they're going to be replacing actors tomorrow. But this is a traditional dispute about pay, terms and conditions, and work opportunities, of which AI is just the next frontier of that. It's a long line back to the Luddites of having the same conversation.
When I put my hand into my pocket and pay for a ticket, I want to see real actors. Paul, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. Now then, 2 of the 7 supporters of Palestine Action who are on remand awaiting trial and have gone on hunger strike have ended their protest. And that leaves 5 who've refused food for between 37 and 45 days so far. This is a battle of wills with ministers. Let's talk now to Dr. James Smith, an emergency physician and lecturer at University College London, who has himself worked in Gaza. Doctor, thank you very much indeed for coming in. We're not really talking about the politics of this, which has been rehashed for a long time everywhere. I'm interested in what actually happens to somebody after 37 days or 45 days of refusing food.
So 2 of the individuals now are on day 47 of their hunger strike, and they are at a critical stage. Beyond about day 30, day 35, what has happened physiologically is that the body has exhausted its energy reserves. It has exhausted...
it's eaten the fat.
Exactly. And you are now breaking down muscles and organ tissues in order to generate enough energy to keep the body going. At this stage, there is a risk of sudden cardiac abnormalities, so problems with the heart, either that the heart is not beating effectively or that electrolyte abnormalities cause the heart to begin to beat in an unusual way. That can precipitate cardiac arrest. The body, of course, can't fight off infections, which are circulating, of course, in the prisons in the same way as they are in the general public at this time of year. And many of the hunger strikers, in fact, all of them, have complained of a plethora of extremely concerning symptoms. One of the hunger strikers, the hunger striker who's currently in hospital as we speak, was complaining of chest pain the night before last, and it took more than 12 hours. In fact, I think it was closer to 18 hours before we were able to get an ambulance to the prison to convey her to hospital.
It is most unlikely that anybody is going to die as a result of this, because the prisons do have systems in place and will get people to hospital at the last minute. That's what they say. But let me ask you two other things. What is the mental condition of somebody who's been hunger striking for so long? Do you have hallucinations? Do you find it difficult to sleep? What happens inside your head?
Well, I should stress that none of the hunger strikers want to die. They are taking this action as an extreme form of political protest, as a last resort. And they have done that sound of mind. Those who
I'm not suggesting they're not sound of mind. I'm just wondering what the effect on your thinking, your imagination, your consciousness is after so many days of hunger strike.
So this is another concern from a medical perspective, that you can start to see cognitive issues. Certainly fatigue, lack of sleep is a problem for all of the hunger strikers. And in fact, all of those who are in prison as part of the Filton 24 at the moment. There is a risk with micronutrient deficiencies, thiamine in particular, that if it is not replaced, that can precipitate severe cognitive issues, some of which can be irreversible.
Sounds very, very serious indeed, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much for coming in and explaining to that. I should read a statement from the Ministry of Justice which says prisoners' well-being is continually assessed and appropriate action is taken, including hospital treatment where required. Thank you very much. Right. Let's turn to an entirely different subject. Johnny Ball, the maths and science enthusiast, television presenter, former stand-up comedian, is now campaigning to persuade older people to upgrade their digital skills and save themselves a lot of time. And it is a seasonal issue in a way, since this is also a time of year when fraudsters prey on the naive. Johnny, father also of Zoe, joins me now. Johnny Ball, welcome to the show. Just explain to people listening, I mean, I'm sure my digital skills are pretty ancient and creaking, why this matters so much.
It matters because it increases loneliness, it increases for older people feeling isolated, and that's the terrible thing. And there's no need for them to be isolated because the technology today is getting better and better. FaceTime, WhatsApp, all these things are beginning so socially invigorating and broadening, and it's lovely. So for older people who are not latched onto this, who are nervous of the technology, I say, well, talk to somebody, talk to anybody, get some help, get some tests, and get in with the others, because it's enriching life today. And if you're not involved with it, then your life is a shadow of other people's lives, and that's very sad.
I suppose, in a sense, if you turn away from the latest technology, you know, it may be problematic in all sorts of ways, but you're turning away from the rest of society.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've never been allowed to be as close to society as we are through the technology. I mean, FaceTiming grandchildren halfway around the world, it's got to be just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And perhaps one of those powerful things that's happened in modern times, that we can do that, and it's wonderful. So for people to miss out on it is rather sad.
I mentioned the dangers of frauds and scams a moment ago, Johnny. I certainly get more and more convincing scams coming onto my phone, you know, people pretending to be the tax man, or companies that I'm involved in saying, I haven't paid this bill or I haven't done this, please click on the link, click on the link. And I'm just about shrewd enough not to do so, but a lot of people do that, don't they?
I think so, and I think it makes people nervous of the system in case they're going to be taken for a ride by somebody. I think I think the answer is, if there's anything comes to you out of the ordinary, not from one of your friends, not directly from one of your relations, not something you're used to, then be very suspicious of it. And basically, if you're not happy with clicking on the web, don't click. I mean, there's a perfect chance to leave it alone. And let it go. Yeah.
That's very good advice. Don't click. Go and make a cup of tea instead. Now, you are also very famous, Johnny, for your interest and your skill at maths and science. And I'm just interested, because we're all thinking at a certain age of keeping our brains sharp, how important you think mathematical puzzles are and keeping a sort of interest in maths is as we age.
I do puzzles every morning before I get up. Because I don't have to get up early these days. I about an hour I do on puzzles, and then I do my exercise routine, because I'm 87 now, and fine. I'm keeping absolutely fit and well. But it is right to keep the brain fit and healthy, and that's what I do. And in the afternoon, I might do another session to keep me awake. And I'm so pleased, because I'm still working today, and I'm thrilled that I'm working, and I'm involved in all kinds of things. I read The Snowman last weekend in Cheltenham, and all kinds of lovely things are happening. And that's why I'm also happy that I'm helping BT and AbilityNet with this project. Yeah. I'm happy that I'm involved. And I'm saying to older people, stay involved whenever you can. Get involved with society.
Well, Johnny, it's good to have an ambition, and my new ambition is to be half as active as you are at your age. Happy Christmas, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, it is that time of week and the time of the year when I'm going to be joined by my end-of-year political panel. And boy, what a year it's been. Time now, 6:46.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Should seized Russian money be handed over to Ukraine so it can buy more weapons? Russia is threatening dire consequences for EU countries if they do. Should they? Or is it too dangerous to poke the Russian bear again?
Ian Dale at 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:48, and a big and exciting moment, my last political panel of 2025. With me here in the studio is the Guardian columnist, Polly Toynbee, the commissioning editor at the Spectator, Lara Brown, and our very own Aggie Chambre. Welcome to you all. Now, let's just go back very, very quickly over the past year, a year of mayhem and disappointment. Go around the table. Polly.
Yep. Disaster for everybody, really, except Nigel Farage. But it may be his peak year. This may be the best it ever gets.
Best it gets for him. What do you think, Lara?
I think there's something in that. Reforms seem to be starting to stall at that 28% mark, which is interesting. But bad year for Labour. This is the year that their train really came off the tracks, I think.
Aggie.
I think I would echo that. I think if we were saying what we are saying now about Keir Starmer at the end of last year, we would have been surprised, saying, I don't know whether he will last another year. I don't know. I don't think it's possible for him to get through next year without a challenge. I think we would have been really surprised. So bad year for Keir Starmer. I'm actually going to controversially say, in the last couple of months, and I think I'm saying this because I listened to her phone in last night, Kemi Badenoch, I think potentially starting to be a good year for Kemi Badenoch, or at least a good end of the year for Kemi Badenoch.
Well, particularly if it's true that Farage is peaking, then this is her big opportunity. It doesn't seem to me there's an enormous movement in the polls for the Tories yet, but perhaps that's coming, Lara.
Yeah, I mean, when this year started, I kept saying, Kemi will be gone by the end of it and Keir Starmer will be fine. And now things seem to have completely reversed. I think she had a very tough 10 months, but she had a quite good last 2. Decent conference speech. And as the ground shifts onto the economy, she's getting much stronger because the Conservatives are still possibly surprisingly quite trusted on the economy, while Reform just don't have that ground there.
Polly.
Well, I think there's I think there's no point in removing a leader, either Labour or Tory, unless you're going to change direction. So if the Tories want to get rid of her, they've got to decide they're going to do something different. She's gone very close to Reform. It would have to be a cleverly typed figure who tries to pull back to more conventional conservatism, and I don't see that party in a mood to do that. They seem to have lost all of their moderates, so they might as well stick with the one they've got if they're not going to go for a new direction.
Well, in terms of new directions, I want to put something on the table, as it were, which is my belief that the next election is going to be surprisingly much about Europe. And I think that because there are 2 parties that are contesting against the old parties to break through, and one is Nigel Farage and Reform with their Brexit heritage, and the other one is the Liberal Democrats, who take completely the opposite view. And I think between them, they are going to put Europe back onto the agenda. And I'd be very interested in your thoughts, any of you, about what that means for the mainstream parties.
Well, I think it's a really interesting point, but I'm not sure Reform UK want to talk about Brexit that much anymore. So, yes, the Liberal Democrats want to talk about Brexit the entire time. Ed Davey, the leader, brings it up most weeks at Prime Minister's questions. But I haven't sensed that Reform UK are actually desperate to talk about it. And I think there have been some disadvantages of Brexit, and I think Reform UK don't want to own those. So although you do sometimes hear Nigel Farage talking about Europe, I'm not sure the next election he will want to be talking about it necessarily. Lara, is this the problem for Reform? 2 things. One, Brexit becoming more unpopular in the country, but also if Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, is successful in calming down the migration crisis a bit, then they've lost the 2 things they really want to talk about. They don't really want to talk about the economy or public services or tax, do they?
No, Reform really don't like talking about the economy because they often end up in very sticky situations with costings. They want to be on close ground. And that's why you often see these weird headlines saying, Starmer basically re-entering the EU, and you'll find out that it's some very minor trade deal or agreement. So I think they want to be on the Brexit ground a bit. But I also think Farage is very nervous being remembered as that 2016 figure because it's a time when he wasn't regarded as having that much future potential. And whatever you think of Brexit, right or wrong thing to do, it's not been a roaring success. And you're right, opposition is increasing. And he will want Reform voters who didn't necessarily support Brexit 10 years ago. And
he has to create a different and a new coalition. Polly, I was very interested in a piece I read in your organ this week by Tom Baldwin, who was, of course, Keir Starmer's biographer, arguing very cogently and very punchily that Keir Starmer has to embrace Europe in a way that he hasn't before, or hasn't so far as Prime Minister. And if he doesn't, then contenders from beyond Number 10, perhaps Wes Streeting, perhaps Andy Byrne and perhaps others, will grab it and use it to beat him with.
No, Baldwin's absolutely right. And Labour has suddenly woken up to this. Just recently, this week, rejoining Erasmus is a very important point. And particularly when you see how the Tories and their press respond in a way that's completely insane. The Daily Mail saying, do you realise hundreds of thousands of Turks are going to arrive? And you think, hang on, it's actually very popular, Erasmus. It always has been, even as we left in 2020. Opinion polls were strongly in favour of staying in Erasmus. So I think they've taken their finger off the pulse. They don't realise that there are a lot of things about Europe people want. They want good trade, and they like Erasmus, and a number of other getting closer things that are no longer toxic in the way that they were for Labour.
Well, we've talked about Kemi. Let's turn and talk directly about Keir Starmer, because, Aggie, I was talking to a senior pollster yesterday who said the trouble is, whatever he does, he is now so far below in the polls, there is really no coming back. And at some point, the Labour Party are going to have to confront that truth.
I think that is the really difficult situation. And you have basically, I think, every Labour MP who is constantly confronting that truth, be it in their own constituency. And they all, as politicians always do, have their eyes on the next general election. And they are thinking about their own seats, and they are thinking about how Keir Starmer's unpopularity, historic unpopularity, is going to affect them.
There has never been a Prime Minister as unpopular as this one, which I find slightly bemusing because he seems to be a pretty affable, straight kind of person most of the time. No.
I think the difficulty for Keir Starmer is he inherited the country at a time when voter loyalty was very, very low and partisanship was a thing of the past, and people are very, very restless. A lot of polling shows people are sort of more angry about things than they have been in about 20 years. So Keir Starmer, if he failed, which I think he has done, was always going to attract more unpopularity than previous people who made very similar mistakes.
He arrived, things were very, very bad, but he did make big promises. And for many people, whether they're on the left of the Labour Party or whether they were voters thinking about what he said about tax, feel that he has simply broken very severe, very solemn pledges that he'd made.
I don't know whether people are worried about pledges because they always think all politicians lie anyway. I think our problem is that we have reached a pitch of such cynicism about politics. I was talking to pollsters who pointed out the last 5 Prime Ministers have all been the most unpopular ever.
Oh, really? Is that right?
Sliding down scale. And that's pretty scary. And so, whether it was Farage or whoever might come next, they're quite likely to get the same kind of clobbering. And I think that's what's most worrying. How do we get people to be engaged again in politics and to believe that governments can do things? And that's Labour's big task.
And when you look at potential contenders for number 10, one of the things I always look at is, have they published a personal book? And of course, Wes Streeting published a very, very successful one. And we read today, I think it's a Guardian scoop, that Angela Rayner is now publishing her memoirs as well. Are those people the main contenders? We've got Streeting and Rayner inside the Commons, and then Andy Burnham up in Manchester, but clearly keen to come back.
Absolutely. They've both got brilliant stories to tell, too. They've both got really gritty, hard graft, hard grind childhoods and youth to talk about. And so their books will be, I'm sure her book will be very good, too. And that quite matters, I think. Your backstory these days matters quite a lot. And they are the contenders. Whether Burnham can get himself back in time, I don't know. Looks unlikely.
Big question. Let's talk a little bit more about Angela Rayner. Aggie, first of all, she did leave the cabinet for a reason. She hasn't yet been cleared by the HMRC. Do you think that she can come back and people will forgive and forget?
I think it depends on the timeline, to be honest. It really, really depends who you talk to, because some people basically do suggest it is way too soon at the moment. It was, 3 months ago where she was basically forced to leave the government, both as deputy leader and as a member of the cabinet too. And that was very, very damaging for her. And I speak to people, in government, in the Labour Party, who basically say it's one of the worst crimes that a politician can commit. Obviously, there are worse. But saying not paying your taxes while you're asking other people to pay more taxes, that is really, really, really difficult. That will be really difficult for her to come back from. But there is obviously a path, and people talk about the path coming.
She might be forgiven by Westminster, but not so much by the electorate, is what you're really saying, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've seen that in polling as well, that she is unpopular in the public, but then she is obviously very popular with Labour members.
Lara, I don't know what it is, but Angela Rayner certainly has it. I mean, she's one of those few politicians who can cut through and people stop and listen to. Do you see her as a potential Prime Minister?
I can definitely see a path for her to make that happen. She's very straight talking. She's very good at media. She's very honest. She's relatable. She's a brilliant story of social mobility. I don't agree with much what she says, but she's a very impressive woman. And she has that rare thing in the Labour Party right now, which is the members actually like her. The members dislike most of their recent cabinet. I think her and Miliband are the 2 exceptions to that rule. So it's entirely possible for her to come back. I can imagine that in the next year.
The reindeers are snarling at me, telling me to shut up soon. So these have got to be one-word answer. This time next year, will Keir Starmer still be Prime Minister? Toynbee?
Yes. No.
No. Aggie, you've got the casting vote. It's all up to you.
I'm going to say no, but it honestly depends on events.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, Kia. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. Put your news categories in the order you'd like them. Pause, rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.